Hi, Mike. How are you?
Hey, Kevin. Very good. Thanks. How are you?
Yeah, really good, thanks. And looking forward to talking about procurement. Obviously, this is something that you've got a large amount of experience in. I think you said you've bought £400 million worth of goods and services over the years.
Yep.
So, yeah, do you want to just start by giving us a bit of a background about kind of your involvement within procurement?
Yeah. So I've been. So my roles have been. I've been a procurement director, in fact, a co-procurement director for a big outsourcing business that we basically bought all their third-party spend for, and that included marketing agencies, but it included IT infrastructure and also recruitment agencies as well. So quite a lot of experience there on buying agency spend. I also, in that business, we ran another service for a big public sector recruitment agency spend area. I've also been a managing partner in one of the UK's biggest procurement consultancies as a specialist. And obviously I've also been an entrepreneur buying services as well. So I've got quite an unusual mix of kind of buy side and sell side in the kind of procurement world. So that's what I thought I'd do is now I work basically, as you know, I work with people like, we work on Resignal together and I work with other marketing agencies on how do you engage with people like procurement professionals in big companies when you're selling? Because as small companies get bigger, they meet these strange people called procurement. And what a lot of agencies, I think if you took this kind of highly creative, adaptable agency leader and compared it to a rationalist, process-driven procurement person, it's not surprising there's often a clash. What I try and do is I help independent agencies understand how procurement think and behave, and therefore how to position yourself when you start to meet them for negotiating contracts.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And again, like looking at this from the agency side for myself, you're a marketer by trade or maybe different disciplines, but what you're passionate about and why you're in that role is because you've developed your craft to a certain point. And then you're going into a negotiation with someone that has a highly amount of trained skills in that area. And the risk is you can be this rabbit in the headlights. And I think, interestingly, that one of the points that you said is you've seen this from both sides. Is it common that people have seen this from both sides? Are procurement people generally, they're procurement people, they haven't started on the buyer side and
correct,
or haven't started on the selling side and shifted to the buyer side?
Most procurement professionals that I know, virtually all, have been in procurement for quite a number of years. It tends to be a career. Not many people, if you go into a company and you're looking for your kind of, let's say you're kind of like 23, 24, you've gone into a big organization, you start thinking, well, what do I enjoy doing? Where does my career take me? Not many people choose procurement as well, that sounds interesting, I'll go and do that. But what you tend to find is most procurement people tend to have been in procurement for some years, and they certainly haven't worked in entrepreneurial businesses on the kind of sell side. So they get quite a one-sided view of the world.
Yeah, which makes it difficult for them to value what it is they're doing or know what goes into the work in order to deliver it, etc. So that can be quite tricky.
I had a very interesting conversation with someone the other day about exactly this topic, which is, procurement people, by the time someone meets me as a buyer from an agency, I assume that you've done a deal with the CMO, the head of digital, the head of SEO, head of content, around a campaign, a series of campaigns, a retainer. I kind of assume that the marketing person's bought into you as an organization. So now what I'm doing is I'm saying, now we need to agree the commercial terms and how we're going to structure this. And often what happens is the agency keeps selling. And I say, I'm not interested, to be honest. I'm assuming that the marketing person's done that already. You need to talk to me about how we're going to govern this, how we're going to deliver the right commercial terms, how we're going to get savings on what we currently spend, how you're going to manage reliability and quality. And that's when all of a sudden they start going, well, this is outrageous. You don't really care. I'm like, no, it's not that I don't care. It's just I assume you've done that already. That's why you're banging on my door.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, that makes sense to me. You would sell your services to the person that is in that role. So let's say it's a marketing director. And then if you speak to procurement, sometimes procurement are involved from the start, certainly if it's an RFP. But quite often it is, like you're saying, it's towards the end, and they're not there to understand everything about what you do. They're there to understand the price of the market and to eventually get a good deal for that service, I think.
And to manage the risk. Again, I think what it's obvious when you talk to someone like me, I don't think I've ever had an agency leader say, I've never heard anyone say that before in my life, I don't know what you're talking about. Everyone recognizes the language, but they just don't think about it necessarily when they're in the midst of a negotiation. You know, one of my jobs is to manage risk. So managing corporate risk is really important. So the idea that I'm going to give maybe a 50K retainer to a very small agency, which we've never worked with before, just because marketing has said it's a good idea, is ludicrous. I've got to manage the risk profile for the organization. Operational risk, reputational risk, financial risk.
That makes it, so going into those risks that you see on that side, is it largely track record? So if you're looking at a company, have they achieved what they've done before? Have they reached a certain scale or financial stability that you think means that they're not going to go anywhere? And but also, I guess, is there a challenge on the flip side of you want to make sure they've got the appetite and hunger to do something for you as well? But then I guess that's probably more on the marketing, the buyer.
So it's quite interesting. So if you're looking at, if you're a small agency that's got a truly innovative proposition and you've delivered something that's very unusual. So a friend of mine is an advisor to a marketing agency, quite a big one. They build new kind of microsites for large corporates in the kind of the e-commerce space. And they do these kind of like, as you do, they do sprints, but they do quite unusual stuff. What often happens with those organizations, if I'm buying for the first time, I'll go, okay, we really want to push the envelope. We want to try things out. So it's an innovation play. I'm going to be less draconian on the terms, but I'm going to limit the amount of damage and risk. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, let's run a small pilot. Let's try something out. We're certainly not about to go into a, £500,000 program with a uncapped upper limit based upon what we find as we go along. So the agile, there's a lot of talk about agile marketing procurement at the moment. Does agile work in marketing procurement? Well, might do, but it's very counterintuitive to a marketing procurement person.
Because I think the challenge with that is quite often when procurement's involved, it's quite a lengthy process to pick a supplier. So you probably don't want to pick a supplier that's going to do a 3-month sprint, and then at the end of it, you'll see if it's a success and move on. You want to pick the supplier that you think is going to be the best supplier for probably a couple of years. It might even be a 12-month contract, but you don't want to change that unless you really have to. So if you're going to go through that process, it makes no sense going through that kind of time, effort, cost if it's just for a short term.
Correct.
May or may not work.
Exactly. So what I've done this week is, so we thought we'd mix it up this week. So I've got some slides. And what I thought we'd do is that I'll kind of done about 8 slides. I'll give you a point of view. And then it'd be great, Kevin, to get your point of view based on what I've said. And if it's contrary to what I say, that's even better.
Yeah, exactly. And we can look at it from both sides for sure.
So if I look at it from what do procurement do, can you see the slides okay?
Yep, we're good.
Perfect. What do procurement do? So when agencies meet us, typically they only see the negotiation. What I also do in the background is a whole lot more stuff. So a lot of work goes into spend and contract analysis. So very data oriented. I'm trying to work out who we're spending money with, what are the SLAs, who's performing, who isn't. Obviously, there's the commercial negotiations that I lead for the organization I'm working with. But I also do market testing and benchmarking. So if anyone that's listening or watching ever gets an RFI, what I'm doing is basically I'm sending out a request for information saying, I might have something, I might have a project, I might have a retainer, I might have a new service that we're looking for. I'm out there looking at the market. So it's a request for information. So my recommendation is when you get those, fill them in, unless it's the 50 questions asking for all your financials and, the inside leg measurement of your trousers, if you get that, then it's probably, well, that's a no. But if someone like me is going, I need to work out how the market's working, where the commercials broadly are, what kind of size agencies are out there, what innovations on offer. So that's me kind of market testing and benchmarking.
One thing we did in the past, actually, this is going back a while, but we collated a lot of the RFP questions that we got into a single document. So if ever anyone sent us, here's 50 questions, can you answer it? But we kind of thought there's a low probability of us winning this. We'll just send sorry, we don't respond to RFPs. However, these are our answers to the most commonly asked questions as a PDF. If you'd like to go on to the next stage, and we'll have a phone conversation, etc., then we can pick that up. But that felt like it's a low level of investment on our side. We can maybe still keep our hat in the ring, sort of thing, in terms of if they are more serious, we'll put the effort in. But if they're not, then we're not going to waste 3 or 4 days filling in a form.
That's a very good point.
We don't know. Yeah,
I've got a big thing about RFP qualification. So in fact, I've developed a worksheet which people can have. Which I think we've kind of developed some work on that as well in the past on the scorecards. Qualifying out things that you really don't stand a chance of winning is really important, but keeping your hat in the ring is great, because you can say to someone, this isn't for us, thanks for asking, here's some information that we thought you might value. And that can be a standard list of RFP responses, it could be some market data, it could be a report you've written for the sector, and it's possible they'll keep you in the process. It's unlikely, but it's possible.
I would assume at this stage, like an early RFI stage, you're probably talking about a long list of...
Correct.
So it could be up to 20, even more in some cases.
On the RFI, it's typically 10 to 20.
Yeah.
I don't want too many, because then I've got all this data coming back, which I can't interpret. So typically I would go for kind of 7 to 10 for an RFI.
Yeah, makes sense. And then as much as you can, do a like-for-like comparison. And
if I can, exactly, Also, savings pipeline management. What I do is, and this is a topic there's probably another podcast in this. When I talk about savings, I mean something very specific. So anyone that's kind of selling or negotiating into procurement, you need to ask them what they mean when they say, we need to save some money on this program compared to what we spend already, because they will have a very definite definition of what a savings is. And that's because of one particular reason. It gets audited. So the finance department audit my savings. So if I try and declare a saving that's not a true saving on the P&L, it gets rejected by finance. So if you're selling or you're negotiating with me, you need to understand what I mean by savings. I.e., there's no point you giving me something for free and saying, well, you've just saved some money, because I'll say, no, you've saved me nothing.
Yeah, that's something that I think is quite interesting, because it feels like times are maybe changing a little bit in terms of almost like that supper club style of definitely kind of SMEs, and the way that they look at financial management, throw coronavirus into the mix. And like the one term I've heard a lot more of over the last year is zero-based budgeting and financing. And I think in the past, a lot of people have just looked at what did we spend last year? We're going to grow by 10% this year. Let's add on a 5% to our costs, or let's keep the costs the same and grow. And zero-based budgeting is very much, let's forget about whatever we did in the past. Let's look at what we need to do now. And that to me seems like a smarter way to go, because you could be focusing on an opportunity that's massive, but only spending 10% of what's required to get there. How much of that logic goes into procurement?
Oh, a lot. So I think we're entering an era again of savings back on the table firmly, and zero-based budgeting is highly likely to be back on the table as well. Because otherwise what's going to happen is budgets that were set at the end of last year, we're now at the end of Q2, beginning of Q3. People are saying, okay, well, is it Q3 budget minus 10%? Well, that makes no sense. In a recessionary market like this, we go back to basics. I'd go back to basics. Whereabouts, what should the budget be? by department and by that kind of service area that would deliver the outcomes that we're looking for.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then if you're on the supplier side, if you're making a 4 or 5 times plus ROI, you're probably very safe, and you might even be able to grow that to do more.
Exactly.
If you're not, you'll probably be fired, and you probably should be.
So the ROI is a critical part. If you're going to talk to someone like me in procurement in this market, you must come armed with data about what is the ROI against your offering. And it needs to be 5 to 1 plus is, okay, you've got my attention. I'd be foolish to start to chip away too much at what we're going to pay you if you're delivering a really strong ROI.
Yeah, because I think one thing to touch upon is this is where you've helped me before as well, is procurement will have a different background in terms of what they're buying. So one example you gave me before is someone one week might be buying toilet roll for a hotel chain, the next week they might be buying SEO. And if it's toilet roll, you can imagine that if you chip away 10% of price, the drop in quality that you get, if there is any, probably is negligible to the point that actually the cost saving is a win.
Exactly.
If you're buying SEO and you go from, let's say someone costs £1,000 or even £1,500 a day, and you negotiate that down to £100 an hour, maybe less, is that a win? Well, at face value, yes, but actually, what if you go from having a person with 15 years worth of experience that can get you that 5 times return to someone that has 2 years experience that is barely going to get you a 1 times ROI?
Absolutely. And in fact, this thing here, this savings thing, that's exactly the point, Kevin. You mentioned it this morning on LinkedIn, is that, I believe that virtually anyone can just buy cheap. It doesn't take a lot of thinking through to beat people up on price. But to buy value intelligently takes quite a lot of thinking through. The other thing is, it's about materiality. I'm going to look as a procurement person about, well, where's the biggest opportunity? And if you're below the radar, one of two things will happen. I'll either leave it alone, or if there's no ROI, I'll just can it. So in the past, when I've gone through private equity-backed organizations that we've worked with, where we've been the outsourced procurement function, we've literally gone through and looked at, well, okay, there's a whole bunch of spend over here that basically no one seems to be able to prove the ROI, but we've been buying it for the last 2 years at 10K a month. Well, we're going to stop it. So what we do is that we would stop it for 4 months. We'd say, it's on hold, 4 months. You can't invoice, don't do any work. After 4 months, we'd see if anything's changed in the business. And if nothing's changed, it wasn't adding any value.
Yeah, that's a good way to.
We won't re-engage them. And I was told I was brutal. It was outrageous. There were phone calls made to the group chief exec. But of course, having been through this before a few times, I'd called the group chief exec and said, you're going to get a call from someone in the next 24 hours. When they call you, what I'd like you to do is tell them it's with Mike in procurement. I can't deal with this.
That's good. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Because I feel like, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is just I don't know, perception, but it feels like a lot of the deals, certainly in the past, were perhaps done because someone knows the CEO, they play golf with them, and they've retained them for the last 10, 15 years because of those personal relationships. And I feel like now it's much harder to do that. We've always talked about, and this is probably another podcast episode in itself, account management being led by results first, and then the relationship comes off the fact of you've got a strong basis of what you're doing is working extremely well, and it's quite easy to get on with someone when things are working really well, that you have the relationship there. And obviously you still want to put effort into that, but if all you have is the relationship and there's no results to back it up with, then that's where I would see you in a weak position. And it feels like, certainly if it's more procurement led, procurement aren't really going to care if you're next door neighbor to the CEO. It's what are you getting as a return?
So I call it this, and I took this from McKinsey many, many years ago when they trained me as a consultant. Yeah, necessary but not sufficient.
Mm-hmm.
So it's necessary and important that you have a strong relationship with your client. It's not sufficient. If you're not delivering results, you're going to get fired.
Yeah.
Your relationship will protect you so far, and eventually the budget holder will go, I can't protect this anymore. There's no demonstration of value, so our relationship is still strong, but you're not delivering the results. We've got to let you go.
Exactly. Yeah, because that relationship will give you some benefit of the doubt and it will buy you time.
Correct.
But it's not going to long term mean anything if you can't deliver upon it.
So the next thing I thought about was, so who are we? So interesting to, because you've met now, a lot of procurement people in your past. So I've got a lot of friends who are still procurement people. Typically, you can't generalize, obviously, about people. But what you can do is draw out themes. And the themes...
That's an important point just on what you're talking about and when you've trained agencies. I feel like there's one agency in particular that you trained, and I was involved in that session as well. And their end conclusion was, wow, procurement are people too. There's definitely that view of, from the seller side, procurement is this necessary evil that we need to get through in order to start the work. And
exactly right.
Two sides to that story. So I'll let you
Procurement are people too. Exactly.
Yeah.
And the themes that come out from procurement people typically are, we tend to be quite rational by our nature. We are definitely analytical. Very few procurement people will survive who can't understand data and who can't run spreadsheets. It's part of who we are.
Yeah.
We are trained negotiators. I think a lot of early stage companies, even up to like 20, 30 million turnover, they'll have maybe, if you're 30 million turnover as a marketing agency, or you're an IT services company, or your professional services consultancy, what has actually happened is you might have 10 people who are commercial negotiators. Of those, maybe 1 or 2 have been trained. The other 8 are instinctive. They've learned it as they've gone along. And it's not that that's bad. The problem is when you meet people like me, we're trained negotiators with a process.
Yeah, exactly.
We know what we're doing. We know what the sequence is. We've filled in our templates. We're well prepared. We've collected our data. And the reality is, and I've got one person in mind who was an old client of mine. He was probably one of the best negotiators I've ever met on the fly. He was someone that you would not want to go into bat with because you would probably lose. Very, very fleet of mind, like amazing insights and quick fire responses. Mm-hmm. However, what I did with Matthew was I used to do a lot of the preparation. So when we were a team, it was brilliant because I'd do all the preparation, I'd give it to him, and then he'd lead the negotiation.
Right.
And now you've got this person that's highly effective as a negotiator in the moment, and also armed with a whole load of data.
Yeah.
They're very dangerous people.
Yeah. I've definitely learned the hard way on this. So on the buyer side, we won a pitch, and this would be going back 10 years, maybe a bit longer. Very well-known financial services company. And it was one of those like open the champagne style moments of when we won that pitch.
Yeah.
Once we got through procurement, it was one of those of like, I don't even want to open a can of Diet Coke. Like, you just feel like you've been beat up too much to the point that this really isn't what we thought we signed up.
This is not what we thought we'd won. Exactly.
And some advice that I've been given in the past that I thought was quite useful is actually, because you're so invested and you've won that pitch and you've been told you've won, when it comes to procurement, and I mean, that's a mistake itself from the procurement side that we should probably touch upon, but we should have been stronger in what we agreed to, certainly in the position.
Absolutely.
But the advice was actually have a separate team to do the negotiation because they're less invested. Whereas if it's a team that have just put all of that long nights into let's make this pitch deck amazing, they've won, and it means a lot to have been chosen and won that. if someone is then asking, oh, can we knock 20% off the price? And your reaction might be, oh, go on then. Whereas someone that's not as invested could be, absolutely not. What do you want to remove? Why would you be asking that question? Or can we add 20% on? And so I thought that's actually a good thing. And actually, in our case, that's where you can help us and have done. Let's look at this from a financial perspective of, we're a business, we're here to make money out of this. It's got to be a win-win relationship. And I think disconnecting yourself from the emotional feeling of winning when it comes to negotiating, I think is really important on that.
Bringing in a third party. A very old friend of mine, many, many years ago, Matthew, said, the moment you're emotionally wedded to the outcome, you've lost the deal.
Yeah.
Because there's no way that you'll back away from, well, I've been celebrating all last night that we won. So I can't tell the team that we've lost it, because that would be, I'd lose face.
Yeah.
But of course, me as a negotiator goes, I can see it in your eyes. I can see that you basically believe that you've won. Now, I wonder how far I can push it. So yeah, I mean, often bringing in a third party as an independent negotiator, which is like, great, but recently will have been awarded the contract subject to terms. I'm here now to negotiate the contract.
Yeah.
You just separate the emotion, the leader, the creative from the problem of how we're going to get this contracted.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So the other thing in terms of, I think people forget is that, or maybe don't realize, is that if you look at the priorities of procurement people, easy to find, go on the web and look at priorities for procurement, key issues for procurement, industry trends for procurement. What you'll find is there's a report done by, I think one's done by Deloitte every year, which is they survey like 200 CPOs and work out what the top issues. Unsurprisingly, savings has been the number one priority for 10 years, or it's 1, 2, or 3, depending upon what the year is. But savings is always up there because it's what procurement do. But as is innovation, governance risk, quality and reliability, they're always in the mix. Mm-hmm. So it's not just, I only care about price. There is more to it than that.
Do you think that varies in a recession? Do you think savings becomes much more important, or do people actually look to invest to get out?
So that's a great lead in to this prompt, which is, so I built something called the Procurement Success Equation. Yeah. I was an engineer by training, as you know, and I'm very rational, and so I like equations. So what I thought was, look, there are typically 5 things that I look at: savings and ROI, innovation, quality, reliability, and risk. In a recession, coming out of a recession, it is likely that I'm going to be very concerned about savings and ROI. I'm going to be very concerned about quality and reliability trade-offs against that savings. Back to your point before.
Yeah.
I would be really foolish to save 10% on my agency if they're going to switch out the team that deliver the results. That would be crazy.
Yeah.
And I'm also going to be very, very focused on risk, which is financial risk in particular. So financial risk in this market is, if I'm going to work with a new small agency and they've got few cash reserves on their balance sheet, if I really want to work with them, I need to work with the owner and the finance team to go, look, if we give you this contract and put you on 90-day terms and it's a 30K a month retainer, we're going to push you over the edge. You'll run out of cash.
Yeah.
So I'd be looking at, once I've done my basic kind of risk assessment of an organization, I'd then be going, okay, we really want to work with this organization. It is something different and innovative. We've made the decision. So we need to help the agency manage its own financial risk. So the learning here is, when you're dealing with a corporate client and you're negotiating, no matter what sector you're in as an SME,
yeah,
when they start to talk about risk, bring your finance team in. Be open about your cash flow. You don't have to give them your P&L and your internal management accounts, because that gives away all your margins.
Yeah, but
you should share your cash flow.
And definitely, if it's a case of, let's say this is a large size and a 50K a month deal, and you're looking at payment terms of 60 days where you can only invoice at the end of the month of which you started, straight away you're giving 3 months worth of cash that you have to incur the costs for.
Correct.
Or you can get paid. So I think seeing that from the seller's side is really important, because you're right that actually you don't want them to cut corners, and they might be incentivized to say, okay, well, where can we save some costs here, because we just don't have the working capital and cash flow to make that happen. So actually,
and a smart procurement person would take that into account.
Yeah. No, I think it's good, and I think that's absolutely the way to look at it from both sides. If you're investing in making this relationship work, which means there is a give and take, and that's probably a negotiation tactic in itself. We'll give you better terms. You maybe give us a discount, but
I'm not about to give you 14-day payment terms and payment in advance for nothing.
Right.
I need something in return. You know, a core premise of any negotiation. If I yield on something, I expect something back that's valuable to me.
Yeah, that makes sense. One question I've got is, where does the opportunity cost come into this? If you haven't invested enough and competitors are outpacing you to the point that you're leaving money on the table, is that down to the seller to show you that value in the way that they pitch and try to secure budget from you, more than it is procurement for buying?
Just explain that, so unpick that a bit further. What are you thinking?
So what I'm thinking is, sometimes I'll give you an example from the SEO, because that's what I'm more closer to. But SEO is largely built, certainly at a kind of large budget corporate level. A lot of it is around forecasting. Forecasting can be tricky, because certainly market conditions like right now, if you're forecasting to stay the same as where you were last year, in a lot of places right now, people will snap your hand off for that. In a normal market, actually, if you're on a declining trend and your forecast says we're going to stay the same, I think that's quite possibly a good result. Whereas I don't think on the buyer side, they would potentially see that. People always want to see growth. On the other side of things, if you can secure a 20% growth, generally that sounds really strong. But what if there's potential to get 100%? And if you could go much further, and rather than having a fixed budget of what you can achieve and doing the best within that budget, what if you had, and it doesn't necessarily have to be uncapped, but what if you were to double it? How much further could you take things that means that you could just generate a lot more profit for the business? And
it is a good question. I get it now. So it's again, go back to what in procurement am I trying to do? I've obviously got to manage quality, reliability, budget within a certain risk envelope. So what I'll probably do is I would structure an agreement along the following lines, which is, there's a base level agreement. You've got to get to base camp. So if you fail to perform at base level, then there'll be some kind of penalty. If you overachieve in a quarter, then what we might do is, at the QBR, we'd go, okay, you've overachieved against the budget that you've got. If you think there's more market opportunity, and you can prove that there is to an extent, I can then talk to the budget holder about releasing more budget to pull more fuel on the fire. So as long as you've got the evidence base, we can structure the contract in a way which is performance related, where you have to get to a threshold. If you dip below the threshold, there's a penalty. If you go above the threshold, there's a small bonus. But at the QBR, we can reset the budgets.
So you're sharing the risk and reward. That makes sense. And I think that comes down to level of trust on both sides. Certainly on the seller side, you want to make sure that if you're going to hit those targets, you trust you're going to get paid for it. Otherwise, you're just putting in extra work for the point that might not pay off.
Correct.
So you have to share that risk maybe to get the upside. But equally on the buyer side, if you're going to spend extra money, it needs to be delivering extra value. So I can see it from both sides. That makes sense.
So I think the key messages, if I give you my kind of key messages and then you wrap up with yours as well, that would be great. So I think the key things are, as a seller, you've got to get inside the mind of procurement, just like any other stakeholder, but their mind's different. And I think I've demonstrated that.
Yeah.
Second one is, You've got to engage with us quite early. Don't engage with procurement to build a relationship at the point of the RFP, because I'm in a process. So I can't do that. Engage with me 18 months in advance, send me valuable information about market trends and market data that makes me want to talk to you more about you seem to be very knowledgeable in the sector.
Mm-hmm.
RFP qualification is key. As I say, you need to have an RFP qualification scoring system. As a seller, it's essential, or else you will waste your time. That procurement success equation, I think, is revealed. We care about at least 5 things, not just beating you up on price. So don't get distracted by the price, because if you agree the price for a certain scope, don't be surprised when I come after you for other things in my procurement success equation.
Yeah.
You need to prepare a negotiating strategy. The prepared mind is far more likely to win the day. And we've had that discussion a lot about just preparing for that negotiation. And then, keep your eyes on the prize. That point you made about just because you've been awarded the contract subject to terms, don't believe you've won it.
Yeah, exactly.
Because what you don't know is, in the background, I haven't told the number 2 supplier that they've lost. Why would I do that?
Yeah.
That would be nuts.
Yeah, exactly. You've got a backup plan. I always find a football analogy for everything. And I always thought, when you were saying that earlier, I was thinking this, it sounds like a football transfer has been agreed subject to terms, which means they need to do a medical, and then their agent needs to come in and negotiate a contract for the player, of which at that point, when they're asking for 200 grand a week and you expect it to be paying 50, then that deal is not done. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Definitely. So those are my kind of takeaway thoughts. What are yours, Kevin, from what we just said?
So, number 1, procurement are real people.
Thank you.
So it's a shock, but I think with that, you have to look at everything from someone else's perspective. If it's a negotiation, the worst thing you can do in negotiation is look at everything from your own view. I know someone that actually, on the Harvard course that I went on, did a large negotiation for a very big M&A deal in the US. And the way that he got that deal through is he split the 2 groups to look at the side of the story from the other perspective and to argue on the other person's side. And then they met in the middle. And I think you're not going to do that in an agency procurement setting, but you can do it in the prep. And you can say, okay, well, what is it that they're looking for?
Exactly.
If I was on their side of the table, I would be wanting to get a win here. How can we give them that? But in return, what is it that we really want? What are we willing to move on? What is it that we're absolutely not going to shift on?
Exactly.
Then you go into that prepared, as opposed to that kind of rabbit in the headlights. I think certainly myself and most people going into that situation the first time, will be looking to do.
Definitely.
The second point I've written down is on value, and I think it's just trying to demonstrate what you're doing has that value so that you can be in a stronger position, because then what you're selling is a return on investment. It's not a deliverable or an activity. And it's much easier to be in a stronger position. So yes, you can cut spend, but that, 5 times ROI that we're targeting is now 4. Would you prefer that? And hopefully that puts you in a stronger position as to saying we can knock 100 quid off our day rate, which
especially in this market where you're looking for top line growth and bottom line profitability clearly are firmly on the agenda.
Yeah, exactly. The last point, I struggle to read my handwriting, which is an ongoing challenge. But number 3 is different teams. So even if you're a small agency, you probably can't do this, but you can get advisors and you can get someone that is distanced from that to, even if they don't lead, at least advise and say, this is what I think you should go in with, and don't crack open that bottle of champagne until the contract is signed, which I think is a big learning for a lot of people. Don't get too carried away. And when the deal is over the line and you're happy with it, celebrate. But until that point, keep calm, carry on, typical British way. And and I think that's something just to be mindful of how you enter that negotiation.
Very good.
Perfect. Okay, well, I think that's a good place to wrap up. And
yeah, that was really good.
I think we've left enough on the table ourselves. Let's pick up procurement part 2 at some point as well.
At some point. Thanks, Kevin.
Perfect. Thanks, Mike.